The 23rd of August Ukraine Media Center continues its operation. I'm Svetlana Cheparenko. I welcome everybody on this day of National Flag and upcoming Day of Independence. We are all appreciative of the Ukrainian military that have given us this opportunity to meet this afternoon. We are talking about the 140th anniversary of the Ukrainian women's movement. Kateryna Levchenko is a government commissioner for gender policy. Ms. Chernetska is vice chairman of the board of the Center for Gender Culture. Joining us online, Marianna Kolodii, psychologist, coordinator of the project Transcarpathian Women's Necklace. Iryna Trokhym, the project manager of the Women's Perspective Center, and Orystlava Sydorchuk, head of the Ukrainian Union of the Ukrainian Women. Kateryna, may I turn to you? This year marked the 140th anniversary of the women's movement. How does it relate to today's life? How does it influence the government policy of Ukraine? Thank you. Welcome, everybody, dear colleagues. Today, I would also extend my congratulations on the day of the national flag. This is more than a symbol of the government, it's a symbol of the national identity. I also welcome you and greet you on the day of the city of Kharkiv, the place of where I was born, the symbol of Ukraine's strength and resilience. So I wish all the inhabitants of the Kharkiv city to stay strong, and the victory that may come as soon as possible. As for the government policy, let me tell you that the state's gender policy was formed, is implemented, and is developing not only in close cooperation with the women's movement, but also in many ways because of the women's organizations and bodies. Women's organizations were at the start and initiated many important issues, legislative-wise, institutional-wise, policy-wise, and giving it the meat on the bone. At the beginning of the 1990s, the Ukraine regained its independence, and it could develop as a country where women's policy might be developed. But this policy has been filled with a new content as a policy of equal opportunities for women and for men. Without doubt, both women's organizations have played a major role, as well as their active contacts with the international bodies, international organizations. I am personally in touch and have 2-decade expertise working in women's organizations. On the meeting at the United Nations Conference on the Role of Women, played an important role to boost the role of women, of filling it with relevant meanings. The Ministry for Equality and Women's Policy was set up. A number of bodies were set up at the Parliament. The important programs were approved, including the first program on preventing trafficking of women and children, as it was called then, the first presidential decree that was then called on improvement of the state of women. But the next year, Ukrainian legislation introduced the notion of gender equality thanks to the efforts of many people. They began to set up the centers of gender education, both at the higher educational establishments as well as in the academia. It is important for the Ukrainian women's movement, the fact that we have separated and severed our relations with the Russian organizations that in early 1990s. They were strong. They had an scientific potential and financial support. All the donors, all the international partners were focused around Moscow, as the capital city of the former Soviet Union, so they banked on Russia. And glory be to the Ukrainian movement, women, who realized very fast that beyond the equality issue, we see very different views on many issues, including what we call women's rights. Important role for the women's movement and impact on policy is played by the world's network of women's organization. It includes more than 40 countries around the world. It continues and has been helping to move the Ukrainian agenda to the level of international fora, both in New York and in Geneva. We are closely cooperating as a state structures and women's NGOs. There is a plethora of laws that are the foundation of the state policy: law on securing equal opportunities and the prevention of domestic violence of 2001, and human trafficking prohibition, international agreements. All these events took place against the backdrop of the active position of Ukrainian women's organization in a close cooperation with the government. The cooperation with the state was virtually stopped when Yanukovych was in power. It was very difficult to cooperate with that kind of state. But the Maidan events and then full-scale invasion of Russia has given a fresh impetus to volunteer movement, to women's movement. It was the way to find the answers to challenges, including women's participation in the Ukrainian military. There was a special law stipulating that gender equality in the army. I am limited in time, but the examples are very numerous. The state policy is being developed in close cooperation with the women's movement. My wish for this movement is that not only do we develop the women's policy, but it must include economic policy, agrarian development, education, the protection of health in every societal spectrum. It should be there. Natalia, may I turn to you? Talking about today, we have just finished the International Forum. As a conclusion of that forum, how does it look today? How has it transformed since the full-scale intervention? Thank you for that question. I perhaps would like to begin with a statement that it is symbolic that the forum women's movement is active in all women. Took place on the eve of the Day of Independence and on the eve of today's Day of the National Flag. This is very symbolic for the women's movement. Some people call us women's movement. Some people call us feminist movement. Whatever they call us, we know for sure that we are talking about common values. Why is it symbolic that these days have seen this forum and where we talked about women's rights and the gender equality? This movement, and I agree with Kateryna as a follow-up to her statement, I'm saying that this movement has played a major role in Ukraine's regaining her independence, in developing democratic Ukraine. It was founded 140 years ago. To me personally, it's not a story about feminist or women's organizations. There are a lot of them in Ukraine. According to Ukrainian Women's Fund, now we have almost 500 bodies registered, bodies that are actively engaged in the movement. They openly declare that women's rights and gender equality is their key areas of activity, but it doesn't come down to 500 organizations. It's about every one of us. It's about women at the front line. It's about women volunteering in the peaceful areas, about women who are decision makers locally or nationally. It's all women that have been united by the values of the women's rights and gender equality. Today, the movement, for sure, is different. It has changed. After the full-scale invasion, we have grown stronger. When we talk about the organizations of feminist or women's nature, they have been burdened with a lot of work. Internally displaced persons are predominantly women. We know from the inception of the full-scale invasion. The fact that the organization that people turn to, internally displaced persons, for example, they were the women's organization. The same situation stands for here. Additionally to the key areas of activities, what they did before the war, before the year 2014, they have been active there as well. But humanitarian assistance has been in their focus as well. It is very important and very significant that in parallel to providing assistance here and now, these organizations think about the future. The women's movement is now considering the systemic changes. We are working with the government, with the international organizations to make sure that on the one hand, to bring the victory as close as possible and think about Ukraine's being built back better. We are aware that post-war reconstruction will not be easy. We understand that reconstruction doesn't boil down to money. It's not about finances. It's about people. It's about local communities. It's about decision makers. It is important that women take part in such a decision-making process, for them to pass such decisions, for them to sit at the table where decisions are being worked out. That is to say, we are moving forward. At the forum, we discussed what our vision is, what our perspectives are. Of course, we need support. We need support from the government. On the one hand, we support the government as a movement, but on the other hand, to advocate and to move forward, we have to be together with the government. We need the support of the international organizations when we plan some international technical assistance programs. The gender equality and women's rights are at the back of people's minds, but only there. In Ukraine, we have good examples of the activities of international partners who are thinking strategically and are planning these measures for the future, including Canada, Great Britain, Sweden, the Netherlands. But such donors, such examples must be much more. We are moving forward. That is my message. I would like to engage our online speakers. Tetiana, we preserve the history of women's movement in Ukraine in different modes, including in the museums. Why do you think it is important? Tetiana, can you hear us? Yes, I can. Welcome, dear colleagues. We all remember the researcher, very famous one, Marta Bohachevska-Khomyak. She compared the women's history on weaving with white threads on the white background. Women have been very active, but to perceive say, in the history textbooks, or to discern them, to find in their place in an official history as a museum of women's and gender history. See our message and mission to make this history visible, this initiative to commemorate the 140th anniversary of the Ukrainian women's movement targets to get this fixed and registered. This is important. I would also like to mention that such a commemoration of a jubilee of the Ukrainian women's movement in the independent Ukraine has been celebrated for the first time in history. It is very good that we are doing it now, in spite of the fact that has been mentioned before. We are confronting the challenges of gender equality that seem to be out of the question now. There are more relevant, more sharp issues in the Ukrainian society, but it is important for us to talk about these issues, talk about the women's contribution. Apart from that, when we read today things, books, quotes, or what is now referred to as the founding members of this movement, many relevant things have surfaced. What was relevant 140 years ago is as relevant as ever. The commemoration of the fact that we are doing, sometimes we are blamed that you are promoting feminist values, something you have brought in from the West, from the United States. This is not exactly so. A century ago, the founders were talking about feminist movement, about the importance of women being united. By searching this history, researching it, we are doing our utmost to invest in what we are seeing today and what will be seeing tomorrow, for us to be stronger. I think at the forum, everyone felt that very acutely. There were a lot of quotations that were voiced 100 years ago, 140 years ago. Hopefully, together we will on our way to doing much more to make sure that this women's history is visible. It's not a picture of white on white background. It's not a matter for us to live in our own bubble, but to have a greater audience. And I may talk to you. Women's movement is not only about NGO. It's not about social issue. It's about economics, policy, and military things. How do you think the women's leadership relate to such issues? Thank you for the question. It is important for us to demonstrate that women are engaged not only in the activities of the NGO area, but the women's leadership is visible everywhere in economy, in security area, in defense area. Of course, we couldn't cover all the issues at the forum, but it was important for us to underline the fact that women from different spheres are engaged and active in today's reality. We also wanted to celebrate the part of our founders who initiated this movement, about the role of their families. It was important for us to talk and demonstrate the way the women in villages and rural areas are being united into different organizations, taking on board new technologies to support their families and to support our military. That is to say, we are fighting on all fronts. The women's leadership in today's Ukraine is not represented enough, but we want to make sure that, according to where is Subidit, it is important that this leadership is seen in business and entrepreneurship to make sure that women are engaged in the political process and the local government bodies, that the local policies are developed by women, as well as policies of national scope. We know that women are not represented enough. That is to say, we can't claim that we enjoy the gender equality, that our needs are met at all the levels of the public life. So there is a lot of work to be done, but our women have demonstrated a lot of examples of their entrepreneurship effort. We are supporting this space for us to survive, to support each other. And indeed, we are able to. We have been told for a long time that women cannot get together. They cannot demonstrate friendship and sisterhood. Such myths must be debunked. We are very successful in this. We got united during the full-scale invasion. Our policymakers and others have taken on their shoulders responsibility in rebuffing Russia's agenda and war, in helping other women who are fleeing from the war, internally displaced persons. Today, we want to retain this potential, this moment. We want to keep it for future, to get other women on board, perhaps those who are not identifying themselves as part of our movement, but they're doing a lot of good things locally. They provide consultations for those women who are not necessarily aware how to start their own business, how to organize self-employment, how to be financially independent. Women are ready to hand out help to those who want to share and receive the assistance. It is important to demonstrate that the movement is there. It's different, it's checkered, but it's present in all the spheres of life. We want to support each other politically or socially. It is important to share expertise and needs, to help those who are in need, and to inform those who are women, those women who can impact the state policy. They must understand the needs and expertise of the women who have not had their own voice. We want these grassroots voices to be heard above, in every place, in every settlement and village. We've been talking a lot about history of the Ukrainian women's movement at the forum. You had a very powerful historical panel. Orystlava, can I turn to you? What are the major developments and successes of the founding women? I would also like to congratulate you on the Day of the National Flag that our fighters are fighting for. As for the historical background, I would like to say that this organization, the World Women's Organization, has had a century experience in fighting for the Ukrainian independence. During the 2 days at the forum, we shared insights with progressive women, self-independent friends. You realize the historical sustainability of the Ukrainian women's movement. Today, it has been reborn. We see a new narrative. But our predecessors have been so inspiring to us today. I would like to quote words of Konstantina Smolinska, who mentioned during the Second World War. And she was a survivor of the First and the Second World War. She was active in helping those at the front. And I am inspired by her words that neither men nor women can stand by and wait for us to be given something. We must be an active force. We are now an active force in the Ukrainian women's movement to make sure that we ensure the gender equality and we ensure the Ukrainians' independence. Our predecessors, Natalia Karbowska included, when she founded Ukrainian women's movement, she stipulated the foundation. She mentioned the social situation of the Ukrainian women. Today, Ukrainian women enjoy a lot of rights, but we are also aware that we must fight on and reach the gender equality. Our predecessors are example for us in terms of fighting, and we should remember them because education and sustainability, patriotism, and resilience, and our stance makes us stronger, makes us believe in Ukraine, and makes us grow stronger. Marianna, can I turn to you now? Prior to the forum, you prepared an appeal of the Ukrainian women's movement to global audience. Why do you think it was important to have it prepared right now? Welcome, guys. Now, this appeal is something new for a document that summarizes a meeting that took place for 2 days at the Forum of Ukrainian Women's Movement. But this is not new for the Ukrainian women's movement. This is an appeal, a call that our predecessors prepared 2 times when we talk historically. This one is the 3rd one, indeed. This appeal is the 3rd one. You know, calling or appealing are very intense documents that Ukrainian women's movement came up with at a historically important milestones in history. Now, the first one was in 1919 as a response to the Kiev events after the Bolshevik came to power and the result of what the Bolshevik terror brought about. The second document that was designed by our predecessors was an appeal of 1933. It was targeting the women's audience during the artificial famine, the so-called Holodomor of 1932-33. The Ukrainian women's movement wanted to have a new appeal to reflect a stance of the Ukrainian women. But indeed, we talk on behalf of all women in Ukraine, reflecting the Russian aggression of Ukraine, full-scale invasion, but in general, the war that started in 2014. This is why we selected that word that historically was there in the Ukrainian discourse. This is an appeal of the Ukrainian women to the women in the world. The fame of the previous documents, these proclamations, was not very fortunate. Of course, some countries supported, some organizations supported Ukraine, especially the women's Ukrainian organizations that were dispersed throughout the world. But it didn't see the response they wanted to see. A spot-on response, a unified voice wasn't there, uniting women and governments around the world. It didn't happen. That's why remembering and giving respect and in light of the current aggression of Ukraine, Russian aggression into Ukraine, and all the war crimes committed in the territory of Ukraine by the Russian military, we wanted to demonstrate our solidarity and voice it. This proclamation was a very difficult document to design. Our colleagues mentioned that Ukrainian women's movement has always been mosaic one, a checkered one. We have people of many different political stances and views, but we are united in terms of values and concepts, including human rights, rule of law, the defense of the sovereignty and protection of the integral nature of our state. That's why the representatives of Ukrainian women's movement have verbalized their view on the war crimes, on the war in general, on the human rights breaches against the Ukrainians by the Russian Federation. We are hopeful that, unlike the fate of the two previous proclamations, this one will be heard in different countries of the world, because we are doing a lot, as my colleagues have suggested. Yes, we have different women of different age living in different countries and living in different communities, rural or urban. They're doing their best, but we will not be able to do it alone. We want to see solidarity from around the world. This proclamation is open for new signatures by the Ukrainian women in Ukraine, and I think we have a time before the 1st of September for new signatures. We want to have it translated into foreign languages and to show it at different fora where the peace building is discussed, the issues of rebuilding Ukraine or issues of war, to perform and show the unified position of the Ukrainian women's movement on this historically important milestone that we are living through. Thank you. Thank you, Marianna. Hopefully, this proclamation will be fruitful and we'll see the results and will be a breakthrough for the Ukrainian women's movement and for Ukraine in general. I would like to turn to our panelists here. Ms. Kateryna, Ms. Natalia, this forum, by commemorating the 140th anniversary of the Ukrainian women's movement, what is in store for us? I will begin answering your second question by following up on the first issue. What is the impact of the women's movement on state policy? I think it will continue to have an effect on it. While preparing to mark the 100th anniversary of the women's movement, I was talking to a lot of women's funds in Ukraine. We have prepared an appeal to the president of Ukraine. It was signed by many organizations proposing to set the date, the 8th of December, the day of the Ukrainian movement, because it was on that day in 1884 when the first sitting of the Ukrainian Women's Organization took place. The president passed it over to the government. Olga Stefanishyna, the vice prime minister for the European integration, she tasked the Ministry for other policies, including social policy, and we have designed a presidential decree which is now being green-lighted at the different levels. And Marianna was talking about that at the forum. She is the Deputy Minister for Social Policy. So we'll keep on working to have such a date on our calendar. Year in and year out, we will be going back to a history that is very important, a history that is not past, but is a part of the present. While reflecting on today's event, I have thought about a relevant issue, that is hybrid threat, information threats. about Russia's effort to dominate every realm of life with their message that they are the best. The Russians celebrated at the early 20th century the Russian women's movement. Some Ukrainian women joined, and that was prior to 2014. The relations were different there. All of us couldn't discern an enemy then, before their boots stepped on our land. But we should understand that Ukraine is at the forefront. Ukraine has her own values. That is to say, our women got united well before they did in Russia. It's an important historical argument in information wars that we are engaged now. We have a lot of plans. We've been discussing them with the organizational committee, steering committees of different bodies. It is important that the information about the women who contributed to the women's movement is not known to a narrow circle of people. We want to have your engagement on the marathon on the television. We'll be communicating with the Ministry of Education and Science, who have claimed that they are in for gender equality, so that the school programs and curricula include both women writers and information about women who, as Iryna had said before, Tetiana Chernetska mentioned, women who worked, who were there, but whose history and whose trace seems to have been lost. We want to have such classes in schools delivering such information. We are expecting a publication of the history of women's movement. There are scarce materials about that, and we talked very specifically about the Women's Fund, on making public all the materials that we prepared for the forum. They're very good, and they will inform those who want to know more. We will continue to communicate with the World Federation of Ukrainian Women. It was forbidden in the Soviet Ukraine when it was occupied by the Soviet troops, by the Soviet power. This is why it is very important to pass this torch. We wanted to have more streets named after outstanding women in Ukrainian history. We would like to see more plays written, to see more artistic events connected to the history of women's history. We have one such an event to announce: a students' theater, Babylon, at the National Pedagogical University named after Bragomanov, will be preparing the play based on the play by the materials written by Pchilka, mother of Lesya Ukrainka. Perhaps you will have something to add on the future. Indeed, I do. I will follow up on what we would like to see. We would like to talk about the importance of being able to hear women's voices when different policies are being designed, in terms of bringing peace, in terms of building democratic society, not only when the fora are taking place or when the commemoration days come. It must be a routine practice. This is what we talked about at the forum. You see, the forum personally for me was not only an opportunity to talk about people who founded the movement 140 years ago and were moving earth and turning every stone to make this movement more visible. I have always been thinking about 250 female and male members to make their voices heard. What we heard was that they want to sustain this crusade. I know that a lot of initiatives are being prepared regionally in smaller communities. I think it makes sense. It is important. It is a good result and fruit of the forum. So the 140th anniversary is not only for this year exclusively. And I mentioned that today is Friday, and talking about forum was initiated about 4 months ago when we first met on the Friday at 17 hours. And then every Friday at 17 o'clock, the committee would meet to have this forum organized. And we invited Kateryna and others, colleagues who joined us. On Friday at 5 o'clock, 2 days ago, we mentioned that to meet at 1700 every Friday has become a tradition. And I think our colleagues will agree that either today at 5 o'clock p.m. or next Friday we will meet again. Thank you, everybody, for the work you've been doing. I'm sure that everything you have planned will be implemented. I really like the way the society understands the women's rights. Let me remind you that we've been looking into the takeaways of the forum of the women's Ukrainian format. We are working on our agenda. We'll resume our work next week. Once again, congratulations on the National Day of the Flag. Glory to Ukraine. Stay tuned.